Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. The mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of the most enduring and unsettling puzzles in American history. In 1587, a group of English settlers, led by John White, established a colony on Roanoke Island in what is now North Carolina. White soon returned to England for supplies, but when he returned 3 years later in 1590, he found the colony abandoned, leaving behind no survivors, only the haunting clue of the word Croatoan carved into a tree. The word Croatoan referred to an island located to the south of Roanoke, which was inhabited by a Native American tribe of the same name. Some historians have speculated that the settlers may have gone to this island seeking refuge or integration with the Croatoan people, especially in the face of supply shortages, famine, and possible hostility from nearby tribes. However, there were no signs of violence or forced departure, and no remains or graves were found to suggest a catastrophic event had taken place. This baffling disappearance has spawned numerous theories. Some suggest that the settlers were absorbed into the local Native American tribes, either by choice or after suffering hardships that made it impossible for them to survive alone. Others believe that they could have sailed away to another location, though there is no definitive evidence to support such a theory. Some even argue that the settlers may have simply moved inland, their fate lost to history due to a lack of records or documentation. For centuries, this mystery has captured the imaginations of historians, archaeologists, and amateur sleuths alike. Despite numerous attempts to uncover the truth, ranging from excavations to research into historical documents, the fate of the Roanoke colony remains elusive. Was it an act of survival, an attempt at assimilation, or something darker? And what exactly happened to the settlers after they vanished from Roanoke Island? The Croatoan mystery continues to spark intrigue, not only for its eerie implications but also as a symbol of the early struggles of European settlers in the New World, a struggle marked by uncertainty, danger, and the unpredictable forces of the land and its indigenous peoples. It stands as a chilling reminder that not all historical events leave behind neat and tidy conclusions, and that some stories, no matter how much we try to unravel them, remain lost to time. It was the end of a mystery, but also just the beginning. To understand the strange disappearance of over 100 English settlers, we have to go back to 1587. This wasn't just any expedition. It was a venture backed by Sir Walter Raleigh and approved by Queen Elizabeth I. Led by John White, an artist and explorer, this group was different from the typical all-male expeditions. It included families, craftsmen, and even White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, who gave birth to the first English child born in America, Virginia Dare. But the colony faced hardships almost immediately: food shortages, hostile relations with local tribes, and poor supply lines from England. After just a few weeks, John White made the difficult decision to return to England for supplies, leaving behind his family and over 100 settlers. What he couldn't have predicted was the outbreak of the Anglo-Spanish War, which delayed his return for 3 long years. When he finally made it back in 1590, Roanoke was gone. So what happened to them? Some believe they integrated with local Native American tribes, possibly the Croatoan, now known as the Lumbee. Others suspect they were wiped out by disease or hostile attacks, though the lack of bodies casts doubt. The carving of the word Croatoan on the tree suggests they may have moved to nearby Hatteras Island, home of the Croatoan people, but no definitive trace was ever found there either. Over the centuries, archaeologists, historians, and even conspiracy theorists have weighed in. Were they assimilated, massacred, lost at sea? Some have even suggested supernatural theories, curses, ancient rituals, alien abductions. But despite centuries of searching, not a single body or grave has been confirmed from the original colony. It remains to this day one of the oldest and greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. And in that silence, no bones, no letters, no farewells, we're left only with that single word, a haunting echo carved in wood: Croatoan. A riddle, left by a vanished people whose story still lingers in the shadows of America's beginnings. In the late 1500s, Europe was in the midst of the Age of Exploration, an era marked by ambitious nations racing to claim new lands, expand their influence, and secure wealth from the vast unexplored territories of the New World. England, led by Queen Elizabeth I, was vying for dominance against Spain, the current superpower in global exploration and colonization. Spain had already established a foothold in Central and South America, and England's response was to send explorers to claim land and establish colonies along the eastern coast of what is now the United States. Sir Walter Raleigh's ambitions to establish an English colony in the New World were shaped by both strategic and economic factors. During the late 16th century, Spain was the dominant colonial power in the Americas, controlling vast territories in Central and South America that were rich in gold, silver, and other valuable resources. England, eager to expand its influence and wealth, sought to challenge Spain's power without directly engaging in the Caribbean, where Spain had a firm grip. Raleigh's decision to focus on the southeastern coast of North America was part of this broader strategy. Raleigh's charter from Queen Elizabeth I in 1584 granted him the right to explore, colonize, and govern lands in North America. The region he chose was an area that had been relatively unexplored by Europeans, present-day North Carolina and Virginia, part of the larger landmass that would later be called the Virginia Colony. Raleigh saw this region as rich with resources like timber, which could fuel England's shipbuilding industry, and fertile soil that could support agricultural ventures, particularly tobacco, which would later become a lucrative export. The strategic significance of this location was not just in its resources, but also its position. A colony in this area could serve as a base for further exploration and expansion into the interior of the continent, and it could provide a safe haven for English ships that could disrupt Spain's shipping routes in the Caribbean. Moreover, a successful colony would offer a direct challenge to Spain's dominance in the New World, especially after Spain's immense wealth from the Americas had fueled its global power. Raleigh's first attempt at colonization came with the 1585 expedition to Roanoke Island. The settlers, under the command of Sir Richard Grenville, faced immediate difficulties with the harsh environment, limited supplies, and strained relations with local Native American tribes. This first effort failed, but Raleigh's vision didn't end there. In 1587, he sent another expedition, led by John White, to establish a permanent settlement on Roanoke Island, which became the infamous Lost Colony. Despite the challenges, Raleigh's desire to establish a foothold in the Americas remained strong. His efforts were part of the larger English ambition to expand its maritime empire and challenge Spain's hegemonic control over the Western Hemisphere. While the Lost Colony is remembered for its mysterious disappearance, Raleigh's legacy as an early English colonizer helped lay the groundwork for England's later, more successful colonial ventures in the New World. Raleigh's first expedition, in 1584, was primarily a reconnaissance mission. The explorers, led by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, sailed along the eastern coast of North America, eventually landing on the outer banks of present-day North Carolina. The region's proximity to the Atlantic Ocean and the fertile land made it an attractive option for a permanent settlement. The area also had a favorable climate, ideal for agriculture and trade, and offered strategic access to important Native American tribes who could serve as trade partners or allies. Raleigh's choice of Roanoke Island as the site for the English colony was a carefully considered one, with both strategic and practical advantages. Roanoke Island's location, nestled between the mainland and the Outer Banks, provided the settlers with a natural harbor, an essential feature for a maritime venture. This harbor offered shelter from the often turbulent waters of the Atlantic, providing a safe space for ships to dock and for trade to flow in and out. Additionally, the island's proximity to key waterways meant it was well positioned for trade with other regions, both along the American coastline and potentially further inland. It allowed English vessels to navigate the coastline with relative ease and served as a base from which to launch further exploration of the surrounding areas. The island was also strategically placed in relation to the indigenous peoples of the region. The Croatoan tribe, part of the larger Algonquin-speaking group, lived on the nearby Croatoan Island, which was just south of Roanoke. This proximity could be beneficial for trade and exchange of knowledge about the land. The Croatoan people were familiar with the local environment, resources, and agricultural practices, which would have been valuable to the settlers who were unfamiliar with the terrain and the natural resources of the region. However, the presence of these Native American groups also presented challenges. English settlers had little experience dealing with the complex social and cultural dynamics of the indigenous peoples. Relations between European settlers and native tribes had often been strained, marked by misunderstandings, cultural differences, and competing interests. While some tribes were open to trade and cooperation, others viewed the English presence as a threat to their way of life, especially as the settlers expanded their territories. Tensions over land, resources, and differing worldviews quickly became apparent. The settlers at Roanoke Island experienced both cooperation and conflict with neighboring tribes, including the Croatoan. While some native groups offered assistance, the settlers' attempts to establish control over the land and resources sometimes led to clashes. The settlers' reliance on the native tribes for food and other resources was also precarious, especially as their initial crops failed and supply ships from England were delayed. These complex relationships would have been one of the most difficult aspects of establishing a permanent settlement. The settlers' dependence on the surrounding native communities for survival, combined with the challenges of negotiating cultural and territorial boundaries, contributed to the growing tension that ultimately made the colony's survival uncertain. In summary, while Roanoke Island's strategic location offered several advantages for settlement, it also placed the English colonists in a delicate position, one where their success depended on their ability to navigate both the physical challenges of the environment and the often tumultuous relationships with the native peoples of the region. The first attempt to establish a permanent English colony on Roanoke Island began in 1585, led by Ralph Lane, an experienced military officer chosen to oversee the venture. However, this initial settlement was fraught with challenges from the very beginning. One of the most significant issues faced by the colonists was poor relations with the Native American tribes in the region, particularly the Algonquin-speaking tribes such as the Croatoan. Although the English settlers initially sought to build peaceful trade relations, tensions quickly escalated. The settlers' demands for food and supplies, combined with their unfamiliarity with the land and its people, led to mistrust and conflict. The Native Americans, who had their own ways of life and traditions, grew wary of the encroaching settlers, and soon skirmishes began to break out between the two groups. In addition to the strained relations with the tribes, the colony faced another major issue: a lack of sufficient supplies. The settlers had been sent with provisions, but they quickly ran out of food, tools, and other essentials. The harsh conditions on Roanoke Island, combined with the ongoing conflict with the Bai natives and the settlers' failure to grow enough food, made life difficult and unsustainable. The situation worsened, and the settlers found themselves in a dire situation, unable to survive without outside assistance. The summer of 1586 was a turning point for the Roanoke colony, as the settlers faced mounting hardships that led them to abandon their efforts. The colonists had struggled with a series of misfortunes, including supply shortages, strained relations with local Native American tribes, and the lack of agricultural success. The dream of establishing a prosperous English settlement in the New World seemed increasingly unattainable. While the island had offered some strategic advantages, the physical and social challenges proved insurmountable in the early stages of colonization. In the midst of this desperation, Sir Francis Drake's arrival provided a lifeline to the struggling settlers. Drake, a famous privateer and naval commander, had been engaged in a successful campaign against Spanish colonies in the Caribbean, and his fleet had been making its way back to England. During his travels along the American coast, Drake encountered the colony and, recognizing their dire situation, offered to rescue them. The English government, eager to maintain its presence in the New World and not wanting to risk further failure, accepted Drake's offer. This first attempt at colonization ended in failure, but it set the stage for the more ambitious and ultimately fateful second attempt just a few years later. The colony's abrupt abandonment, combined with the ongoing tensions with native tribes and a lack of resources, left a lasting imprint on Raleigh's plans. Despite the failure, the English were not ready to give up on their dreams of establishing a foothold in the New World, and the Roanoke colony would soon rise again, this time with a different set of settlers, under even more mysterious circumstances. The second attempt to establish an English colony on Roanoke Island in 1587 marked a critical chapter in the history of English colonization in North America. Unlike the first expedition, which had been primarily made up of men focused on military and exploratory duties, the 1587 colony was much more diverse. with families, including women and children, brought over to establish a more permanent settlement. This decision reflected Sir Walter Raleigh's vision of creating a self-sustaining community rather than just a military outpost. John White, who had gained valuable experience from the 1585 expedition, was appointed to lead the new colony. His previous involvement in the region, both as an artist who had documented the landscape and native peoples and as an explorer, made him an ideal candidate. White's knowledge of the area and the dynamics of the local tribes, especially the Croatoan people, was considered a crucial asset. His presence was also meant to help foster better relationships with the indigenous groups in the region, which had been a source of tension and conflict during the previous attempt. The inclusion of women and children in the new colony signaled Raleigh's intentions to create a more permanent settlement. Families were necessary for the establishment of a lasting community, and it was hoped that the colony could eventually become a self-sustaining agricultural outpost. The settlers were tasked with growing crops, building homes, and creating the necessary infrastructure to survive in the harsh conditions of the New World. It was expected that the colony would thrive with this more balanced demographic. The first few months of the colony's establishment were relatively uneventful, though there were challenges. The settlers faced difficulties in securing adequate supplies, and tensions with local Native American tribes remained. The colony's location on Roanoke Island, while strategically advantageous, posed some logistical difficulties for settlers, who had to deal with unpredictable weather and limited access to resources. There were also issues with obtaining the necessary supplies from England, and John White himself made several trips back to England to secure more provisions and support. In May 1587, just months after White's departure to England, a crisis struck. He faced a critical decision. Due to ongoing supply issues and the worsening situation in England, White was forced to leave the colony temporarily to gather reinforcements and supplies. Before leaving, he instructed the settlers to carve a sign, Croatoan, into a tree or post if they moved, as a way to signal where they had gone in case of relocation. White promised to return within a year, but political and military conflicts in England delayed his return for 3 long years. Upon White's return in 1590, he found the settlement completely abandoned. The houses were dismantled, and there was no sign of struggle or violence, just the carved word Croatoan on a tree. Despite searching the surrounding areas, White was unable to find any trace of the colonists, and the fate of the 1587 settlers remains one of the most enduring mysteries of early American history. The second attempt at colonization, like the first, had ended in failure. While White's leadership and the inclusion of women and children were attempts to create a more sustainable settlement, the difficulties of securing resources, maintaining relations with local tribes, and the harsh conditions of early colonization ultimately proved insurmountable. The mystery surrounding the disappearance of the Roanoke colony has fueled speculation and intrigue for centuries, but it remains unresolved. The Roanoke colony, both in its founding and in its disappearance, set the stage for future English colonization efforts, particularly with the eventual establishment of Jamestown in 1607, which succeeded where Roanoke had failed. One of the most poignant moments of this expedition was the birth of Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. She was the granddaughter of John White, and her birth symbolized hope and renewal for the struggling colony. Her name would become etched in history as it marked the first step toward creating a permanent English presence in America. However, despite this hopeful beginning, the colonists quickly found themselves struggling. The initial months on Roanoke Island were marked by tensions and difficulties, much like the first settlement. The colony faced supply shortages, harsh environmental conditions, and challenges in building a stable community. Relations with the native tribes remained tense, and the settlers were in need of vital resources, especially food and building materials. In addition, a lack of clear leadership after John White's departure for supplies only worsened the situation. As the settlers struggled to survive, the English government, preoccupied with the war against Spain and other imperial concerns, was unable to provide the support the colony so desperately needed. This prompted John White to make the difficult decision to return to England in 1587 to seek reinforcements and provisions for the struggling colony. Little did he know that this decision would ultimately lead to one of the greatest mysteries in American history. The colony was left in a vulnerable state, relying on White's promise to return quickly. His departure, however, would stretch into an unanticipated 3-year absence due to England's involvement in the Anglo-Spanish War, as well as a fleet of ships being diverted to defend against the Spanish Armada. This delay would seal the fate of the colony and make the subsequent discovery of its fate even more mysterious. While John White was away, no one knew that the settlement would face its darkest chapter. His return to Roanoke Island in 1590 would reveal a completely different scene, one that would raise even more questions about what happened to the colony. John White's decision to return to England in 1587 was driven by the growing difficulties faced by the Roanoke colony. Despite his leadership and experience, the settlers had encountered severe shortages of food, tools, and other essential supplies. The colony's isolated location on Roanoke Island and the strained relationships with the local Native American tribes made survival increasingly difficult. The settlers were in dire need of resources, and White knew that without additional provisions, the colony would not endure. One of the most heart-wrenching aspects of White's departure was the fact that he left behind a group of colonists who included his own granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. Virginia's birth had been a symbol of hope for the colony, representing the possibility of a lasting settlement in America. White's decision to leave his family and the other settlers behind was not made lightly, but it was deemed necessary for the survival of the colony. The plan was for White to return to England, gather reinforcements and supplies, and return within a year to ensure the colony's continued existence. However, White's return journey to England was fraught with difficulties. Upon arriving in England, he found the country embroiled in conflicts with Spain, notably the Spanish Armada, which delayed his ability to secure the necessary ships and provisions. It was not until 1590, 3 years after his departure, that White was able to return to Roanoke Island. By this time, the colony had vanished, and the mystery of its fate had begun. The fact that White had left his family and fellow settlers in such a vulnerable position underscores the severity of the situation on Roanoke Island. His absence, though well-intentioned and essential for obtaining resources, ultimately contributed to the tragic end of the colony. When White returned to find the settlement abandoned, with no signs of struggle or distress, it marked the beginning of one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in early American history. The only clue left behind was the word Croatoan carved into a tree, an enigmatic message that suggested the settlers had either relocated to the nearby Croatoan Island or met a different fate altogether. Despite multiple searches and years of speculation, the true fate of the Roanoke colony remains unknown, and White's decision to leave the colony and his family behind stands as a poignant reminder of the challenges faced by early colonists in the New World. The mystery surrounding Roanoke endures, to this day, fueling intrigue and theories about what happened to the lost colonists. However, what should have been a short journey to procure supplies turned into a much longer delay than anyone could have anticipated. England, embroiled in ongoing conflict with Spain, was about to face its greatest naval challenge, the Spanish Armada. In the midst of this crisis, Queen Elizabeth's forces needed all available ships and resources to fend off the threat of invasion. As a result, White's return to Roanoke was indefinitely postponed, leaving the colony without supplies or any form of assistance for a full 3 years. During these long years, what was happening on Roanoke Island? Was the colony holding on by sheer determination, or had they met with disaster? White's delayed return left the settlers vulnerable to the unpredictable nature of their environment, as well as the complex relationships with the native tribes in the area. The question loomed large: had they managed to survive, or had something far more sinister taken place in their absence? As the months turned into years, White had no way of knowing that when he finally set sail back to Roanoke in 1590, he would find a colony that was entirely deserted, with no sign of the settlers, just the mysterious clue that would haunt history for centuries to come. What happened to those colonists? The silence of 3 long years would hold the answer to one of America's greatest mysteries. When John White finally returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, after a long, frustrating delay, in England he was met with a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The colony, which had once been a thriving settlement, was completely deserted. There were no signs of life, no settlers, no buildings in disrepair, no remnants of any struggle or battle. The area appeared eerily calm, as though the settlers had vanished into thin air. White scoured the settlement, desperate for any clue that would explain what had happened. The only thing he found was a word, Croatoan, carved into a wooden post. It was the name of a nearby island, and the clue left White with more questions than answers. What did this mean? Had the settlers left for the island? If so, why? Had they been forced to abandon the colony, or was there a different, more sinister explanation? Adding to the mystery was the absence of a crucial sign, the cross. When White had left 3 years earlier, he and the settlers had agreed upon a distress signal, a cross carved into a tree or structure, indicating that the settlers had been forced to leave because of danger. But there was no cross. Instead, the only sign left behind was Croatoan, a word that suggested the settlers may have gone to the island to the south where the Croatoan people lived. White, eager to find answers, decided to sail to Croatoan Island, convinced that the settlers might have relocated there. However, his search was thwarted by nature itself. As White attempted to sail towards Croatoan, a fierce storm struck, forcing him to turn back. The weather was too treacherous, and White's ships were unable to make the journey safely. John White's return to England in 1590, after his brief and ultimately fruitless search for the lost colony of Roanoke, marked the beginning of a painful chapter in his life. Despite his hopes and intentions, the mystery of what had happened to the settlers on Roanoke Island only deepened, leaving White with more questions than answers. The absence of any clear signs of struggle or violence, no bodies, no wreckage, combined with the cryptic Croatoan carved into a tree, left White and later generations to speculate about the fate of the colony. White's search, hindered by a storm that forced him to return to England prematurely, left him no closer to solving the riddle. The only clue, the word Croatoan, suggested that the settlers might have relocated to nearby Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, where a group of Croatoan Native Americans lived. However, White could not investigate further due to the lack of time and resources, leaving the mystery unresolved. The questions that haunted White were profound. Had the settlers been attacked by hostile Native American tribes? Had they perished due to disease or starvation? Or, as the carving implied, had they simply moved to another location? Some speculated that the settlers might have integrated with nearby tribes, while others believed they had met a violent end. The lack of evidence supporting any specific theory only served to fuel more questions. The loss of the colony had personal significance for White. His granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World, had been among those left behind. Her fate remained unknown, and White's return to England without definitive answers added to his sense of failure and loss. For the rest of his life, White would carry the unresolved mystery of Roanoke, and it would remain one of the most perplexing and haunting stories in the history of early American colonization, even though the mystery of Roanoke remained unsolved. In White's time, it continued to captivate the imaginations of future generations. Over the centuries, various theories have been proposed, ranging from the idea of the settlers assimilating into local tribes to more speculative and supernatural explanations. To this day, the fate of the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of the most enduring mysteries of early American history, with the unanswered questions echoing through the centuries. As the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke has persisted for centuries, a number of theories have emerged over the years, each trying to explain what might have happened to the English settlers. While no theory has ever been definitively proven, they all offer intriguing possibilities about the fate of the colony. Let's break down some of the most popular ideas. A. Joined native tribes. One of the leading theories is that the settlers, rather than meeting a tragic end, may have integrated with local Native American tribes. The word Croatoan carved into the post and the fact that Croatoan Island was nearby suggests that the settlers could have sought refuge with the Croatoan people, who lived on what is now Hatteras Island. Some descendants of the Croatoan people show evidence of European traits, light skin, blue eyes, and European-style tools, which further fuels this theory. This raises the possibility that the settlers, or at least some of them, survived by merging with indigenous tribes and living peacefully among them, though their true fate remains a mystery. B. Massacre or conflict. Another theory speculates that the colony may have fallen victim to attack, either from hostile native tribes or, more likely, from Spanish forces. Spain had a strong presence in the Americas at the time and was in conflict with England over colonial expansion. It's possible that the Spanish, seeing the English presence in the area as a threat, may have attacked Roanoke. Alternatively, tensions between the settlers and nearby native tribes could have escalated into violence. Evidence supporting this theory includes the disappearance of the settlers without a trace of a peaceful departure, suggesting that they may have been attacked and killed by one or both of these groups. C. Starvation or disease. The harsh conditions in the New World, along with limited resources and poor planning, could have led to a catastrophic situation. Starvation, disease, and lack of support from England, due to the 3-year delay, could have been factors that caused the settlers to disperse in search of food, water, or medical assistance. If they tried to move inland, they may have simply been lost to time, succumbing to the elements or dying of illness without leaving any record of what happened to them. While no bodies were found, the possibility of the settlers dying off in small isolated groups remains a plausible explanation. D. Secret migration. Another possibility is that the settlers didn't perish at all, but instead relocated further, inland beyond the reach of white search. It's possible they tried to start anew away from the coast, where they could escape from Spanish or Native American threats, but in the process, they became lost to history. This theory suggests that the settlers could have moved into what is now North Carolina or Virginia and simply never made contact again, leaving behind no trace for future generations to find. E. Supernatural or fringe theories. As with any mysterious, historical event, there are also more fringe theories that have captured the public's imagination. Some have suggested that the settlers were victims of supernatural forces, including alien abductions or time slips, where they were transported to another dimension or time. While these theories may not hold much historical weight, they've certainly become a fun, if fantastical, part of the Roanoke mythos. Some even speculate that a curse was placed on the colony, causing them to vanish without a trace. These supernatural theories often pop up in popular culture and continue to engage people with wild ideas about what might have happened to the lost colony. Each of these theories offers a different lens through which to view the mystery of Roanoke, but none of them can provide a definitive answer. Whether the settlers integrated with native tribes, fell victim to violence or starvation, or simply disappeared into the wilderness, the disappearance of the Roanoke colony remains one of history's most enduring unsolved mysteries. In recent years, new discoveries have shed light on the mystery of the lost colony, giving historians, archaeologists, and researchers fresh clues to work with. These new findings are slowly but surely unraveling the mystery, offering potential answers, or at least more pieces to the puzzle. Archaeological finds on Hatteras Island and the mainland. One of the most significant developments in the investigation of the lost colony came from ongoing archaeological work on Hatteras Island, the area near where the word Croatoan was carved into a tree. Researchers have uncovered evidence suggesting that English settlers may have interacted with the Croatoan people. Items such as European tools, pottery, and other artifacts of English origin have been found near native settlements. These findings offer possible support for the theory that the settlers joined or integrated with the Croatoan tribe, as the evidence aligns with the idea that the English survivors might have lived among the indigenous people. These artifacts not only connect the settlers with Native American groups, but also suggest that there was more exchange between cultures than originally thought. DNA studies. In addition to physical evidence, advances in DNA studies have opened up new avenues of research. By studying the DNA of modern descendants of the Croatoan people, scientists have been able to trace potential European genetic markers. Some of these genetic markers show traces of English ancestry, which has led researchers to speculate that the lost colonists might have survived by merging with the native populations. This scientific approach brings a fresh perspective to the mystery and raises the possibility that the settlers, or their descendants, could still be living today, potentially integrated into local native tribes. The Zuniga map. Another fascinating clue comes from the discovery of a map known as the Zuniga map, which was created by Spanish cartographer Juan de la Cosa in the early 1600s. The map contains a depiction of the coastline, showing a location labeled as Roanoke, and an area marked with a curious note, Croatoan. This discovery has been particularly significant because it suggests that Spanish explorers may have been aware of the English settlers' presence and could have interacted with them, providing more context to the theory that the settlers may have relocated or merged with local native groups. While the map doesn't directly confirm the settlers' fate, it offers a tantalizing clue that more interaction may have occurred between the English and Spanish at the time than previously understood. The mystery is still being unraveled. Despite these fascinating discoveries, the mystery of the lost colony remains unresolved. Archaeologists, historians, and researchers continue to search for new evidence, while technological advancements like DNA testing and geographical studies help piece together the puzzle. Whether the settlers merged with native tribes, were lost to disease or starvation, or disappeared for some other reason, the story of the lost colony is far from over. What we do know is that the history of Roanoke is still being rewritten, with new research constantly adding layers to the mystery. Every new artifact, map, or genetic study brings us closer to understanding what really happened to the lost colony. But as of now, the question still remains. What happened to those 100 English settlers who vanished without a trace in 1590? The search for answers continues. The mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke continues to captivate the imagination of Americans and people worldwide, even centuries after the settlers disappeared without a trace. So why does this story still haunt us? The first mystery on American soil, Roanoke, represents one of the earliest and most mysterious chapters in America's history. Long before the nation was even born, this colony, which was one of the first English attempts to settle in the New World, faced a mysterious end. The question of what happened to the settlers who vanished without leaving a clear trail remains the first great American mystery, marking it as an iconic event in the nation's early history. It set the stage for countless unsolved enigmas in American history, and as such, it stands as a symbol of the unknown. Themes of survival, hope, and the unknown. At the heart of the Roanoke mystery lies the universal human themes of survival and hope in the face of the unknown. The settlers, stranded in an unfamiliar land, faced incredible odds: hostile environments, unknown diseases, and most of all, isolation. These were individuals who left behind everything they knew in search of a better life, only to disappear without a trace. This theme of survival resonates with many, as it speaks to humanity's enduring will to thrive, even in the most daunting circumstances. But the mystery also evokes a sense of despair and loss, symbolizing the harshness of early colonial life and the fragility of human efforts to carve out a future in an uncertain world. Moreover, the mystery taps into humanity's fascination with the unknown. What could have possibly happened to a group of people who left no clue behind? This sense of wonder, paired with the lingering unanswered questions, keeps people intrigued. There's something deeply compelling about not knowing, something that fuels our desire to understand and explore the unknown, even when the answers are elusive. The enduring legacy of Virginia Dare, perhaps the most poignant figure in the story of Roanoke, is Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. Born in 1587 to the colonists, Virginia became a symbol of hope for the settlers and for the English crown, who had invested so much in establishing a foothold in the New World. Her disappearance, like that of the other settlers, remains an enduring symbol of the mystery and tragedy of Roanoke. Over the centuries, Virginia's name has become synonymous with the lost colony, making her one of the first faces of American history. The story of Virginia Dare and her fellow settlers has left a lasting imprint on the American consciousness. As the first English child born on American soil, she became a symbol of the potential and promise of the New World. But her disappearance also reflects the vulnerability and hardship of early colonial life. As a result, Virginia's story continues to inspire fascination and mystery, cementing her place in the collective memory of the United States. The Roanoke mystery remains an indelible part of American history. It stirs up deep emotions tied to exploration, survival, and the unresolved questions that define the early days of the nation. Whether it's the thrill of uncovering forgotten secrets or the longing for closure on one of America's most intriguing historical enigmas, the lost colony of Roanoke continues to haunt us, reminding us that not all mysteries have a clear solution. Some are destined to remain open forever. As we wrap up our journey through the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke, the question remains, Was it assimilation, a massacre, or something else entirely? Theories abound, but the truth may forever remain elusive. We'd love to hear what you think. What's your theory? Was there a peaceful assimilation with local tribes, or did something darker occur? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed diving into this mystery with us, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss out on future historical deep dives. We've got more intriguing tales from the past lined up. Next time, we'll be exploring another unsolved historical enigma. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.